There are days that start off so perfectly normal that you'd never guess they'd end with your entire life flipped upside down. Take that Tuesday, for example. I woke up, went to work, dealt with the usual nonsense from my boss, who I suspect was put on this earth specifically to test the limits of my patience, and drove home with the kind of exhaustion that makes you question all of your life choices. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Just another regular day in the exciting life of Christopher Hughes. And then, at precisely 7:42 p.m., my world cracked right down the middle. It started with an unexpected visitor. I was in the kitchen, trying to convince myself that reheating 3-day-old lasagna counted as cooking, when the doorbell rang. Now, in our neighborhood, people don't just show up unannounced. We have text messages for that. A phone call, at the very least. But there it was, ding-dong loud, demanding, like whoever was on the other side had some sort of divine right to be there. I sighed, abandoning my culinary disaster, and went to open the door. Standing there, wearing a look that could curdle milk, was a man I had never seen before in my entire life. Now, this in itself wasn't the shocking part. We get door-to-door salesmen, confused delivery drivers, even the occasional lost soul trying to find some obscure house number that doesn't actually exist. But this guy? He wasn't holding a clipboard or a package. He was holding a set of car keys. And then he said the sentence that started the unraveling of my perfectly constructed life. "You must be Christopher," he said, like we were old buddies meeting up for a drink. I figured it was time we met, considering the circumstances. Ah. Circumstances. That word alone was enough to put my brain into overdrive. I crossed my arms, leaned against the doorframe, and gave him a once-over. Early 40s, well-dressed, the kind of polished look that screamed successful but probably unbearable at dinner parties. Not the type who sells cable subscriptions, that's for sure. "I'm afraid you have me at a disadvantage," I said, keeping my tone light. "You know my name, and I have absolutely no clue who you are." The man gave a small, knowing smile and held up the car keys. "This," he said, twirling them between his fingers, "belongs to your wife. Sarah, right?" I had a total of 3 seconds to process that sentence before my stomach did a very unsettling flip. See, Sarah's car was parked in our driveway, where it had been for the past 2 hours. So unless she had suddenly acquired a second vehicle without mentioning it to her loving husband, that meant these keys were for something else. Something she shouldn't have. I stayed calm. Mostly because collapsing into a dramatic heap on the floor wouldn't have been a great look. "I'm going to need you to elaborate," I said, my voice as neutral as I could make it. He did. Oh boy, did he ever. "Sarah's been borrowing my car," he said, with the kind of fake sympathy that made me want to punch a pillow. "For our little meetings. She must have dropped these in my office, and well, I figured I'd be a gentleman and return them." Ah. Meetings. Another one of those delightful words that take on a whole new meaning depending on the context. At this point, my brain was desperately trying to do damage control. Maybe this was some kind of misunderstanding. Maybe Sarah had been borrowing this guy's car for an innocent reason. Maybe. And then he said something that effectively dropkicked my last shred of hope into another dimension. "Though, between you and me," he added, lowering his voice like we were conspirators in some grand scheme, "she's a terrible driver. Nearly took out a stop sign last Thursday. It's a miracle she hasn't totaled the thing." Last Thursday. The same Thursday Sarah had told me she was staying late for parent-teacher meetings. The same Thursday I had spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to figure out what to watch on Netflix, completely oblivious to the fact that my wife was out there practicing her demolition derby skills in another man's car. There it was. The first undeniable, slap-you-in-the-face piece of evidence. I exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down my face. "Let me get this straight," I said, mostly for my own sanity. "You're telling me that my wife has been what? Carpooling with you? Running errands? Taking scenic drives to reflect on her life choices?" The man had the audacity to chuckle. "Come on, Christopher. You seem like a smart guy." I am a smart guy. Which is why, at that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I didn't yell. I didn't throw a fit. Instead, I reached out, plucked the car keys from his fingers, and gave him the biggest, fakest smile I could muster. "Well," I said cheerfully, "thank you so much for returning these. I'll be sure to let Sarah know how kind you are." His smirk faltered, like he hadn't quite expected that reaction. He shifted slightly, maybe waiting for me to explode or demand answers. I didn't give him the satisfaction. I simply shut the door in his face. And then I stood there, keys in hand, staring at the wood grain like it might suddenly start giving me life advice. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't I lose my mind right then and there? Simple. Because Sarah had no idea that I knew. And if there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that when someone thinks they've successfully played you for a fool, that's when you have the most power. So I did what any rational man would do in this situation. I pocketed the car keys, walked back to the kitchen, and ate my terrible lasagna. Because the game wasn't over yet. Not by a long shot. There's a special kind of feeling that comes with knowing something you're not supposed to know. A mix of amusement, irritation, and the mild inconvenience of having to pretend like everything is normal when, in reality, it absolutely is not. That was me, sitting across from Sarah at the dinner table later that night, watching her scroll through her phone like she wasn't secretly a demolition derby champion in another man's car. I had options. I could have slammed the car keys on the table, leaned back in my chair, and said something dramatic like, "So, Sarah, you want to explain why some guy just returned your secret getaway vehicle?" But that would have been too easy. Too predictable. Instead, I decided to play along. "So, how was work?" I asked, casually stabbing at the overcooked pasta on my plate. Sarah didn't even look up. "Same as always." I nodded. "Ah, right. Parent-teacher meetings last week, right?" That got a reaction. A tiny one. Her fingers hesitated over her phone screen for half a second before she shrugged. "Yeah." I took a sip of my drink, biting back a smile. "Good turnout?" "Not really." "Fascinating." "Absolutely fascinating." Because according to the helpful gentleman who had dropped off the keys, Sarah's attendance record that night had consisted of one long conversation with a stop sign. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms. "You know, it's funny," I said, watching her carefully. "I ran into someone today." She glanced up. "Oh? Yeah." I paused for effect, just to see if she'd squirm. She didn't. That either meant she had no guilt at all or was so deep in this nonsense that lying had become second nature. "Who?" she asked, looking mildly curious, like I was about to tell her I'd met some long-lost cousin at the grocery store. I twirled my fork around my plate, dragging it out. "Some guy. Dropped by the house. Said he knew you." Sarah finally set her phone down. "Who?" "Oh, look at that." Now she was interested. I shrugged. "Didn't catch his name." Sarah frowned. "What did he want?" I took another slow sip of my drink. "Dropped something off for you. Thought you might have misplaced it." I watched her face carefully. For a moment, nothing. Then a fraction of a reaction. The kind that would have been missed by someone less observant, less irritated, and less amused by the sheer stupidity of this situation. Her expression smoothed out quickly. Too quickly. "Oh. Maybe one of the parents from school. You know how they are." "Ah, yes. Because it's completely normal for a parent to personally deliver car keys to our house for a teacher who definitely should not have had their car in the first place." "Yeah, maybe," I said, nodding like I was buying it. I should have asked. He seemed friendly, though. Real chatty. Sarah made an offhand sound, picked up her phone again, and that was that. For her, anyway. For me? It was just getting started. The next morning, I decided I needed a second opinion. Not from a therapist, because I wasn't ready to pay someone to confirm what I already knew. No, I needed someone who would give me honest feedback while also enjoying the ridiculousness of the situation. That's how I ended up at Ryan's place. Ryan had been my best friend since college. The kind of friend who had once talked me into driving 3 hours for an exclusive party that turned out to be a birthday gathering for a 12-year-old. The kind of friend who gave terrible life advice but was always enthusiastic about it. So, naturally, I went to him. I barely made it through half the story before Ryan started laughing so hard he almost choked on his coffee. "She's borrowing some dude's car," he wheezed, wiping his eyes. "And she thinks you're just gonna let that slide?" I shrugged. "Apparently." Ryan grinned. "So what's the plan? Gonna rent a billboard? Hire a skywriter? Show up to wherever they go and start taking pictures like some kind of undercover detective?" As appealing as that last one sounded, I shook my head. "Nah. I'm gonna let her keep lying to me." Ryan blinked. "What?" I leaned back in my chair. "Think about it. She's already in deep. If I don't call her out, she's just gonna keep going. I want to see how far she takes this." Ryan stared at me for a long moment. "You know what? That's insane." I nodded. "Yep. I love it." Of course he did. For the next week, I said absolutely nothing. I watched. I listened. I let Sarah do exactly what she was going to do, and I kept track of every little inconsistency. The staff meetings that seemed to only happen on Friday nights. The sudden need to help a friend move 3 towns over. The way she never left her phone out anymore, as if it might start screaming her secrets at me. And the best part? She genuinely thought I hadn't noticed a thing. That's the thing about people who cheat. They always think they're smarter than the person they're lying to. Always assume their partner is too clueless, too trusting, too distracted to connect the dots. Sarah had no idea that I wasn't just connecting the dots. I was drawing the entire picture. And when it was finally time to show her? Oh, it was going to be beautiful. There's a certain level of disrespect that comes with being lied to badly. If you're going to deceive someone, at least put in some effort. Make it a challenge. Make it art. But Sarah? Sarah was insulting my intelligence. For the past week, I had been sitting back, watching, collecting evidence, waiting for the right moment to drop the hammer. And she was so confident that she had me completely fooled. Like Tuesday, when she waltzed into the house an hour later than usual, wearing an expression so neutral it was almost suspiciously neutral. "Traffic was insane," she announced, tossing her bag on the couch like she hadn't just committed a crime against monogamy. I nodded. "Oh yeah? I-35 backed up again?" Sarah pulled out her phone, thumbs moving at record speed, probably to text whoever she'd just spent the past hour with. "No, side streets. Took a different way home." "Interesting. Because the traffic app on my phone said the roads were clear." I didn't call her out. Not yet. Instead, I just leaned back, arms crossed, watching as she buried herself in distractions, clearly testing how much nonsense she could feed me before I gagged. Sarah had no idea that she was playing a game she had already lost. On Thursday, things got even more full. Ryan, the only person outside of my now crumbling marriage who knew the full situation, had taken it upon himself to be the most unhelpful helper in history. "So," he said, scrolling through his phone, "have we considered revenge?" I raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yeah, we, Christopher," Ryan said, throwing an arm over the back of the couch like some kind of CEO of Bad Ideas Incorporated. "This is a team effort. You need me. I provide moral support and bad suggestions. It's my calling." I sighed. "What did you have in mind?" Ryan grinned. "Alright, so step 1, you pretend you have an affair, too. Really get inside her head. Maybe hire a fake mistress." I stared at him. "A fake mistress?" "Yeah, someone to send you suspicious texts, accidentally leave stuff at your house, mysteriously disappear for weekends." "You want me to spend money on a theatrical performance instead of just confronting her?" Ryan scoffed. "Christopher, we're men. We don't just talk about our feelings. We create unnecessary chaos. It was moments like these that made me question why I was still friends with him. Friday night, Sarah had another urgent excuse to leave the house. "Jenna's going through something," she said, grabbing her keys, avoiding my eyes. "She really needs me tonight." Jenna, her best friend who had moved to Seattle 2 months ago. I didn't even blink. Wow. She came back just to have a breakdown? Sarah hesitated. Just for a second. Then she smoothed her expression and nodded. "Yeah. You know how she is." "Oh, I did now." "Tell her I say hi," I said, watching her walk out the door to go provide emotional support to a woman who lived 2,000 miles away. The second she left, I grabbed my phone and sent Ryan a message. She just left for her weekly Cheaters Anonymous meeting. Ryan, you should follow her. I already know where she's going. Ryan, okay, but have you considered dressing up in a disguise and dramatically revealing yourself? Have you considered shutting up? Ryan was having too much fun with this. But I wasn't going to follow her. I was going to beat her at her own game. Sunday morning, Sarah woke up to find me already up, dressed, and getting ready to leave. She blinked. "Where are you going?" "Oh," I said casually, "just out." Sarah frowned. "Out where?" I smiled. "You know, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Nothing you need to worry about." That got her attention. "Wait," she said, pushing the blanket off. "What does that mean?" I shrugged, grabbing my keys. "It means you don't get to know where I go at all times." Kind of fun, right? Mystery. Suspense. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Is this about something?" "Of course not," I said. "Why would it be?" She stared at me like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. And then, because the guilt was starting to catch up to her, she forced a smile and nodded. "Okay. Have fun." Oh, I would. Because Sarah wasn't the only one who could act like nothing was happening while something very much was. Sarah was starting to get nervous. Not in a dramatic way. No pacing, no biting her nails, no teary breakdowns where she confessed everything like some kind of overacted TV drama. No, she was too committed to the lie for that. Instead, she did something far more entertaining. She started trying to be a good wife again. I almost laughed when it began. It was so predictable. Like Monday morning, when I found my coffee already made before I even got out of bed. This was suspicious, because Sarah had never once in our entire marriage made me coffee. This woman had watched me struggle half asleep with the machine every morning like it was an Olympic sport and had never offered assistance. And now I had pre-made coffee waiting for me. "Wow," I said, lifting the cup as Sarah walked into the kitchen. "Look at this. A freshly made coffee. Right here, in my very own house. What a coincidence." Sarah smiled, a little too quickly. "Thought I'd be nice." I took a sip. "Ha. So what's his name?" Her smile twitched. "What?" "The guy you're feeling guilty about," I said casually, setting the cup down. "Because this is classic guilt behavior." Sarah rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Christopher, can I just be nice?" "No," I said immediately. "Not after 7 years of letting me suffer every morning. This isn't kindness. This is a desperate attempt to keep me distracted." Sarah crossed her arms. "You're paranoid." I took another sip of the guilt coffee and nodded. "Aha. And you're acting like a woman who is trying not to panic." She said nothing. Just grabbed her phone and walked out of the room. 1 point for me. The next few days were even funnier. Sarah started calling me more. Now, to be clear, Sarah wasn't the type to check in throughout the day. If I got one text from her while I was at work, it was usually something inspiring like, "Did you take out the trash?" But suddenly, I was getting actual calls. Like Wednesday afternoon when my phone buzzed and Sarah's name popped up. I answered, fully prepared for some award-winning nonsense. "Hey, babe," she said, voice weirdly cheerful. I narrowed my eyes. "What do you want?" "Wow," she said, fake laughing. "Can't I just call my husband to say hi?" "No," I said. "Try again." There was a pause. Then, "Fine. I was just wondering what time you'll be home." I grinned. There it was. "Oh, I don't know," I said, stretching the words out. "Maybe I'll stay out late. Do a little of this, a little of that. You know, mystery activities." Sarah went quiet. I let the silence sit for a second. Then, "Something wrong?" "No," she said, too quickly. "Just, haven't seen much of you lately." I let out a slow whistle. "Wow. You must really be feeling bad about something." "Christopher." I smiled. "Yes, dear?" She sighed. "I'll see you later." Click. 2 points for me. By Friday, Sarah was losing her mind. Not in a way that would be obvious to anyone else. But to me? Oh, it was hilarious. For the first time in weeks, she was home on a Friday night. Which meant her little boyfriend was either busy or starting to ignore her. So she did something incredibly bold. She cooked dinner. I walked into the kitchen and almost had to sit down. Because there she was, standing at the stove, looking so pleased with herself, like this was a completely normal thing for her to do. "Smells good," I said, leaning against the counter. She beamed. "Thought we could have a nice night together." I raised an eyebrow. "Ha! And I didn't even have to pretend I was cheating to get this treatment." Sarah froze for half a second. Then she turned back to the stove, pretending she hadn't heard me. I grinned. 3 points for me. By Sunday, she finally cracked. Not in a way that gave her up completely. No, Sarah was too stubborn for that. But it happened in the smallest way. I was on my laptop, doing nothing important, when Sarah walked into the room and sat down across from me. I ignored her. Because she hated being ignored. "Hey," she said after a moment. I clicked through an email. "Hey." Another pause. Then, "Are we good?" I looked up. "Why wouldn't we be?" She fidgeted. "I don't know. You've been kind of weird lately." I smiled. "You think I'm acting weird?" Sarah crossed her arms. "Yeah." I shut my laptop. "You're right. I have been weird." She blinked. "Really?" "Yeah," I said, leaning forward. "It's almost like I've been waiting for something." Her face shifted. She knew. She knew I knew. But she still wasn't going to confess. I stood up, stretching. "You'll figure it out eventually." Then I walked out of the room, leaving her sitting there, wondering when everything was going to collapse. Sarah had officially reached the paranoia phase of her terrible life choices. She wasn't panicking yet, but she was getting careful. Careful in the way a bad liar gets careful, where they suddenly start correcting details you never asked about, like they're trying to patch up the holes in their own stupidity. It was entertaining. Like Monday night, when she walked in the door and immediately started giving extra details I never requested. "Traffic was crazy," she announced, setting her bag down. "There was a wreck on Main Street. Took forever to get around it. I didn't even look up from my laptop." "Oh yeah?" "Yeah," she said. "And then I had to stop for gas. And then Jenna called. She's thinking about moving back, by the way. I told her she could stay with us for a bit, but obviously we'd need to talk about that first." I let her ramble for a full minute and a half before I interrupted. "Sarah," I said. She stopped. "What?" I shut my laptop and looked at her. "Why are you explaining every second of your evening like you're building an alibi?" Her face did something interesting. a little too still, like she was recalculating her entire approach in real time. "I'm not," she said. I nodded. "Oh, okay. So I just hallucinated that long-winded breakdown of your whereabouts?" She crossed her arms. "You always act like I never tell you anything, and now I do, and you're complaining?" I grinned. "No, I'm just pointing out that when people suddenly start oversharing, it's usually because they're hiding something." Sarah hated that. I could see it in her face. Because I was right. And she knew I knew. But she was still holding the line. So I let her. For now. Wednesday was even better. She was on edge all day. She kept watching me like she was trying to figure out if I knew something, or if she was just imagining things. Then, just after dinner, she hit me with the classic relationship interrogation tactic. "You've been really distant lately," she said. I took a sip of my drink. "Have I?" She nodded. "Yeah. Like, weirdly distant." I pretended to think. "Ha. Maybe I'm just busy." Sarah wasn't satisfied. "With what?" I smiled. "Things." She frowned. "What things?" I shrugged. "I don't know. Mystery things." Her eyes narrowed. "Christopher." I raised an eyebrow. "Sarah." She stared at me for a solid 5 seconds. Trying to read me. Trying to guess if I was playing her the way she had been playing me. She was starting to break. I could see it. But she wasn't ready to fold yet. So she dropped it. For now. By Friday, Sarah was in full panic mode. She pretended she wasn't. But the signs were there. For one, she had started checking up on me constantly. Not directly, of course. That would be too obvious. Instead, she'd say things like, "What are you up to today?" with way too much fake casualness. Or, "Are you staying late at work?" in a tone that wasn't actually curiosity, but a fishing expedition. It was hilarious. Because I wasn't the one who needed to be worried. Sarah was. And she knew it. Sarah must have sensed that her time was running out because she started making one last effort to fix whatever twisted version of reality she thought she was controlling. By Monday, she was in full damage control mode. "Hey, I was thinking," she said, all smiles as she leaned against the counter that evening. "We should go on a weekend trip. Just us. Maybe get away for a bit?" I almost choked on my drink. "A trip," I repeated. She nodded, brushing her hair back like this was a totally normal thing for her to suggest. "Yeah, you know. Just a little getaway. It's been a while since we really spent time together." I set my glass down. "Wow, how convenient." Sarah blinked. "What?" "You suddenly want to go on a romantic trip," I said, tilting my head. "Couldn't have anything to do with the fact that I haven't reacted the way you expected, could it?" Her jaw tightened, but she forced the smile to stay in place. "What are you talking about?" I grinned. "Oh, Sarah." I leaned in slightly. "You should know by now that I don't answer stupid questions." Her face twitched just for a second before she sighed dramatically. "Forget it. I was just trying to do something nice." "Sure. Because spontaneous acts of love always happen right before everything collapses." The final moment came Thursday night. I was sitting on the couch, pretending to scroll through my phone, when Sarah came in and stood in the doorway, arms crossed. I didn't acknowledge her. She hated that. "Are you going to tell me what's going on?" she finally asked. I sighed, setting my phone down. "What exactly do you think is going on?" Sarah shifted. "I don't know. You're just different." I nodded. "You know what's funny? I was going to say the same thing about you." Silence. She stared at me, like she was trying to read me, but she was already too far behind to catch up. Finally, she let out a breath. "Christopher." I just feel like there's some kind of tension between us lately. I grinned. Oh, I wonder why. Her face froze. Because that? That was the first real crack. That was me telling her, without telling her, that I knew. And she wasn't prepared for it. Are you? She hesitated, like she was choosing her words carefully. Are you upset about something? I leaned forward, resting my arms on my knees. Sarah. She swallowed. Yeah. I smiled. What's his name? The room went dead silent. For the first time in weeks, Sarah had nothing to say. I watched her face go through every possible reaction: shock, guilt, calculation, denial, but none of them made it all the way through. Because she knew. She knew there was no getting out of this one. And the best part? I never even had to say the word cheating. Because when someone is guilty, they hear it even when you don't say it. Sarah took a slow step back, like maybe she could physically retreat from the situation. I don't know what you mean. I laughed. Laughed. Right in her face. Because at this point, her attempts at lying were just embarrassing. Come on, I said, standing up. You've been feeding me garbage for weeks, thinking I'm too stupid to notice. And now that I'm calling you out, you suddenly have nothing to say? She looked down, like if she didn't meet my eyes, this conversation wasn't actually happening. I shook my head. You know what? Don't even bother. Sarah looked up, startled. What? I don't want to hear the excuses, I said. I don't want to hear whatever nonsense speech you've been rehearsing in case you got caught. I don't care. Sarah opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Let me make this simple, I said. I know. I've known for a while. You're just lucky I've been entertained by watching you fall apart under the pressure of your own terrible decisions. Her face drained of color. I nodded. Yeah. Exactly. Sarah stammered, like she was still trying to throw together a last-minute defense. Christopher, I swear, it's not. Nope, I said, shaking my head. Don't want to hear it. She stared at me, breathing a little too fast, like the reality of the situation was just now hitting her. I picked up my phone, completely done with this conversation. So here's how this works, I said. I don't care about the details. I don't need to know how long it's been going on, or how it started, or whatever fool excuses you have lined up. None of it matters. Sarah blinked. But. I stood up, walking past her toward the hallway. Pack your stuff. She turned quickly. Wait. I stopped, looking at her over my shoulder. You thought you could play me, I said. Turns out, you were just playing yourself. Then I walked away, leaving her standing there with nothing. Game over. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button and rate the story in the comments.